Joseph Smith's proposals to Emma and other wives, were they similar or different? Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, everybody knows about Joseph Smith's marriage proposal to Emma, but was it similar to his proposals to other women? Dr. Christopher Smith says there's a lot of similarities, so you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Well, very good. Well, let's turn to your other chapter. Let me see here. It's chapter 4, I think. If I remember right. Does that sound right to you?
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3, A Revelation to Get Him a Wife, Joseph Smith Marriage Proposals to Emma Hale and to Prospective Plural Wives. So we kind of hinted at it a little bit. I guess one of the things that I found really interesting about that chapter was you said that most people separate Emma from all the other wives, and you said, no, we need to look at them together. So take it away there.
Sure. So, I noticed, I've spent a lot of time studying the Emma-Joseph relationship, especially in connection with like the treasure-seeking stuff. I did a lot of research on Joseph Smith's period as a treasure seeker in that early New York. So, and polygamy was always like a secondary interest to me. But like when I got to really digging into some of the polygamy stuff, I started reading these accounts of Joseph Smith proposing to these other women, and I was like, wow, this is the same stuff that he did with Emma. Like things that you would think were functions of having to do all this in secret and of the sort of like the social taboos against polygamy. Actually, he did it with Emma too. Like before polygamy was a thing, before he had to worry about those social taboos, he already was proposing to her in weird ways, right? So like the secrecy around the plural marriage proposals. Well, he proposes to Emma in secret also, because he's sort of eloping with her, to hide the relationship from her parents because her parents disapproved. So like he starts out doing secret proposals. Secondly, he's the way that he tends to meet his plural wives is like at some point they live in his household or he lives in their household for a short time. And like the shared housing is a common feature of the women that he picks. And he lived in Emma's household for a while during a treasure hunt. That was on her father's property. And so he lived there for a couple weeks and he got to know her in a, fairly intimate environment, like home environment. And I think maybe like that was a good experience for him. Like he met somebody really cool and built intimacy with her and then ended up marrying her. And he like repeats that pattern throughout his life. He gets endorsements from multiple people. There was a treasure seer named Samuel Lawrence, who was one of his like neighbors in Palmyra. And he convinces Samuel Lawrence to go down to Harmony with him and like introduce him, give him an introduction to Emma and like endorse his character to Emma. And then when he actually makes the proposal to Emma, he does it at the home of Josiah Stowell, who was an older man in connection with the sort of treasure crew that had been there on their property digging. So Emma knew Josiah Stowell and like trusted him. This was a trusted older adult, and Joseph gets Josiah Stowell to kind of like back his proposal. And actually, like, he even sort of, like, springs this on Emma as a surprise, which is a common thing that he does with other plural wives. She says that when she left her house in Harmony to go to Stoll's house, she had no plans of marrying Joseph. That was not in her mind anywhere. And he sort of springs the marriage proposal on her when she gets there. She thought she was just going to like investigate Joseph's character and, get some kind of endorsement from Josiah Stowell. So he sort of springs that on her and they get married while she's there. And it's kind of a surprise to her. And also there seems to have been the theme of divine commandment. So he tells Emma that in order to get the golden plates, the angel has told him he has to marry her and bring her to the hill. So like there's a kind of like divine mission that's going to be fulfilled through her marrying him. And again, obviously that's like very much a theme of the plural marriage proposals. Angel with a flaming sword told me that I had to. Um, and like, you know, you get salvation out of it for your whole family. Like there's all these religious motives, and there's always like an angel telling us this is what we have to do. So it worked with Emma, and he repeats the pattern, I think, because it worked with Emma. And yeah, so like so there's this like formula that he follows with Emma, and especially insofar as that formula worked for him, he repeats it. And it really wasn't about, like, he's not doing the angel with a flaming sword thing because it's polygamous. He's apparently doing, you know, invoking the angel's commandment because it worked with Emma. And so it's going to work again.
I thought that was really interesting. You know, because I want to tie this back into your other chapter with the adoptive sealings, because, you know, you talked about how Joseph lived in Emma's house with her parents, so we got to know her, and then he did the same thing. Didn't Fanny would live with him for a while?
Yeah. She was
Okay.
She was like a household domestic servant, basically, but also the adopted daughter, you know. So
Yeah.
there was like a familiar relationship there as well as an employment relationship.
Well, and then with the Partridge sisters and the Lawrence sisters as well, right?
Yeah.
So we can see this happens a lot.
Yeah, it did.
And they were probably about Emma's age when he met Emma, right?
Yeah, and others too. I mean, like I've listed, I think, probably like 10 different people who at some point he lived with or shared housing with, who he ends up proposing to. So,
well, and then with the Partridge sisters, I'd like to go there for a minute.
Uh-huh.
You know, there's the story about whether Emma participated in the sealing, and it seems like Cheryl Bruno's poo-pooing that idea a little bit and saying that probably didn't happen. And I've wondered, well, maybe I should ask this question first. Do you think that it's possible that Joseph could, first of all, did Emma participate or not participate with the Partridge sister sealings?
I'm trying to remember, but were the Partridges before or after the Lawrences?
I think they were before. That's my memory, but I'm not sure.
I always get those ones mixed up. But there were sisters. Well, also there was a pair of sisters that he did two proposals to. Okay, so,
yeah, that was the Partridges.
Okay, that was the Partridges. Okay, so what happens is he marries the Lawrences and the Partridges both in secret. And then Emma finds out about the Lawrence sisters, and she's mad that he has married them in secret. And so she makes him give them up. He actually like renounces his marriage to the Lawrence sisters and walks away from them, and they leave the home. And like that relationship, for all intents and purposes, is terminated. But the like deal that he makes with Emma is now it's going to be the law of Sarah. Emma is going to get to pick who he marries. Okay. She has to pick somebody. She doesn't have the right to say like, no, you can't marry anybody, but she gets to select his partners. And she selects the Partridge sisters, who actually he has already married, but she doesn't know that. And so he kind of like with a wink and a nod, like goes and, you know, remarries them in a ceremony that Emma is party to. So he's kind of doing this to appease her and also to like deceive her about the fact that he has already married them. Okay. So is Emma involved in that? I mean, like not initially, but you know, eventually, yes, she is. And then like regrets it afterward.
And Cheryl makes the case that Emma was not part of that second marriage with the Partridge sisters.
Interesting.
Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't know her reason.
Oh, you didn't read her chapter yet?
No, I haven't read the other chapters in the book.
Dang, it's a good one. It's a good one. So it'll be out this week with Cheryl, just FYI. So awesome. You can watch the video.
All right.
we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But so as far as you know, especially not reading Cheryl yet, Emma did participate in that sealing.
I think that's the general understanding among historians. So yeah, Cheryl's being a bit contrarian if she's saying Joseph wasn't or Emma wasn't involved in that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, you'll have to read her chapter then.
I will. Yeah. I need to read the whole book. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Well, yeah, the thing that I love about this is you don't have to read them in order, and I have not. I've been jumping all around because you can do that with this.
Yeah.
You can jump all over the place.
Yeah.
Are there any other sealings that you can think of that follow the pattern that he did with Emma?
Yeah, so let's see. If I were to pick one, which one would I pick? I mean, so the one violation I think of the pattern, or sort of change in his pattern that I'll talk about, which I think is kind of interesting, is like let's talk about the romantic element.
Okay.
Because one of the big questions that I've always had in my mind is like, was Joseph Smith like romantically involved with these women? Did they have a romantic interest in him? You know, like was there a reciprocated romantic interest? Because he's framing it so much in this like angel with a flaming sword. There's a religious mission. There's not a lot of like overt romance and things, but he does that. We get like hints with, especially with specific people, that there was something romantic. So with Emma, like he talks about her like being beautiful. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Like he seems genuinely interested in her. He and she both say that the other person was the person they preferred to marry over anyone else they knew. So that's like not very romantic. But like there was something. There was a little bit of heat there, I think. Just like not super on the surface. With Fanny Alger, we have a source that explicitly says that it was whispered that Joseph loved her. So that seems to have been a romantic situation. And then like a couple of his other earliest proposals in Nauvoo also had a romantic element. So when he proposes to Nancy Rigdon, he like goes and tries to kiss her, and she like forcibly rejects him, and he's like professing his attraction to her, and he writes this whole letter that's supposed to persuade her to join him in polygamy, that frames it in terms of like God allows us to seek our happiness. It's called the happiness letter, right?
Yeah.
Like anything is permissible as long as it's for our happiness. And which is like really morally permissive language, and illustrates, I think, what I was saying earlier about like narcissistic personality. Like anything goes, right? As long as it's, you know, in line with what you want. But like that's the language that he uses to try to persuade Nancy to marry him. I think Nancy didn't think that marrying him would make her happy. Like, I think the argument was ill-framed as an appeal to her. Like, there was a serious lack of empathy on his part for understanding, like, where she was coming from in rejecting him. Like, this wouldn't have made her happy to marry him, so the argument was unpersuasive. But, like, after that experience, his language changes, his approach changes, and he's no longer making romantic approaches, he's making religious approaches after that. So like one of the things that I think I discovered in like studying those marriage proposals is that while there are these like persistent features of his proposals, you know, the secrecy, he goes to Nancy in secret. He like brings her into the home of another plural wife, and he like locks her in a room basically with him while he makes this proposal. And he gets like John C. Bennett to endorse the proposal. He gets Miranda Hyde to endorse the proposal. So he's, you know, going for the third party endorsements. Like these are, you know, persistent features of the pattern that I've talked about. But then like there's this discontinuity, which is that like the proposals they start out more romantic with Emma and Fanny and Nancy and other early ones, but then they become, in his later proposals, they become very like stripped of the romance and they become all religious. And you get people like Lucy Walker, who says, there was no romance in it, or at least there wasn't for me. Like, we saw plural marriage as like a great religious sacrifice that you had to make, and you just had to like go with it because God demanded it, And that's like much more the vibe with the later proposals. They seem to just be devoid of romance. So
Okay. Would that be true with Helen Mar Kimball as well?
I mean, yeah, like Helen Mar Kimball wasn't into it at all. She didn't want to marry him at all. And she was really, really upset, actually. I mean, I think basically like her parents pressured her into it. So that there's that third party endorsement, like really using the sort of getting people who already have a relationship with the target of the proposal to like pressure them to marry. Like, that's Helen Mar Kimball is one of the strongest cases of that, where that pressure was really decisive for her. She basically says the only reason she did it was because her father, told her it was okay and told her to do it. So that was the decisive thing for her, and she was really apparently very unhappy. Because it meant that she couldn't go on dates with other boys, and like she was, it's a little unclear whether she was sexually involved with Joseph, but it's clear that he expected her to be like exclusive in the sense that like she wouldn't have sex with anybody else or marry anybody else.
Yeah, she was just 14, right?
Right. And when she went into it, she didn't realize that. Like, she seems to have been under the impression that it was just going to be like a formal ceremony or something ritual, and that it wouldn't have real implications for her romantic life. And
like an adoptive sealing, possibly?
Well, it was certainly something, right? But not. I mean, like, I think she went in with eyes open that it was a marriage, but she really thought there were scare quotes around that, like she didn't think it was actually going to mean anything. So,
well, because I wonder if that was part of the selling it, for lack of a better word, is, oh, she's just 14. It's just going to be it's a marriage, but it's more like an adoptive sealing. Mm-hmm. If you can't tell, I loved your chapter on adoptive sealing.
Yeah.
It was just so amazing.
I don't want to make adoptive sealings the frame through which... Again? I said I don't want to make adoptive sealings the frame through which we interpret everything, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just wonder if it would have been easier to convince Emma of the Partridge sisters that this was adoptive, it wasn't romantic, mm-hmm. or Helen Mar Kimball, it wasn't romantic. Mm-hmm. It was just like and I don't know that he told Emma about Helen, but because it just seems like, oh, well, if it's an adoptive sealing, it's non-sexual, it's not going to be a big deal. I mean, of course, there's some of the polygamy skeptics, that's their that's their number one point, is Joseph didn't have children with any other people, so therefore, even if they were sealings, they clearly weren't sexual. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I actually believe the accounts that say that John C. Bennett may have performed abortions in Nauvoo. And I think like Joseph was probably fairly careful to like, if he did have sexual encounters with women, to have sex with them like out of cycle, or, do withdrawal or whatever the sort of natural birth control techniques were. His marriages to women who already had husbands, like that seems pretty clearly designed to provide like plausible deniability if there was a child. And actually there were a couple cases of children where like the mother of the child seems to have believed that the child was Joseph's, but like genetic testing later revealed that actually the child was, belonged to the husband, the legal
Windsor.
husband.
Yeah. You're talking about Joseph and Windsor Lyon.
Sylvia Lyon Session. Yeah.
Or Josephine was the daughter.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So like there was enough possibility of pregnancy, I think, to like show that those relationships were sexual. Like if people believed that these were Joseph's children, then like evidently there was sexual stuff happening there. But like, I think he was careful and apparently like pretty successful at being careful, not to get women pregnant as much as possible. So That
Okay.
would be my explanation. It's just that like even though the theological rationale for polygamy somewhat was about children and like, increasing your kingdom and so forth, like he also was very much aware of the risk that pregnancies posed and tried to avoid that as much as possible. So,
Okay. So I remember talking with Todd Compton. One of the big charges about Joseph Smith was he's a pedophile. He's having all these teenage brides. And Brian Hales had made the case that, especially with the teenage girls, Helen Mar Kimball, Mary Rollins Leitner, a few others, Partridge Sisters, Lawrence Sisters, that there probably weren't sexual relations. I asked Todd Compton, and he said, yeah, that's probably true. Where do you fit on that?
I don't know that I like have studied enough the sort of issue of like which ones were sexual and which weren't to be able to like name names as to, which ones were sexual and which weren't. I'm
just talking about the young girls.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that Joseph had a ceiling, and then when you're of age, we'll have sex later?
I think with like some of the very young ones, like Helen Mar Kimball, that's plausible. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, I would make no specific claims, for instance, about Helen Mar Kimball having been sexual with Joseph or not. I don't know the answer to that, So,
okay.
Yeah.
But it's plausible that the younger brides, Joseph probably didn't have sex with them.
I don't think that all of his relationships were sexual. Like that's, and as like beyond that, I don't know which ones were and which ones weren't. And it's not an issue I've studied enough to be able to say anything more than that.
Diary.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very good. Anything else on the Emma chapter and the proposals chapter there that you want to add?
I'll just say like one other thing, which is that like a sort of a sub thesis of the chapter is that his relationship with Emma was very tied up with the treasure quest and the idea of like getting the plates and everything. And I think really like the theology behind the treasure quest, that, like God wants him to get rich, is kind of the theology behind polygamy too. Like it's kind of like God wants him to get rich in both gold and wives, and I like that's sort of a running
like
thread
Solomon
through the chapter. Yeah, well, yeah, right. Solomon is one of his people that he invokes repeatedly, right? So, but I talk about the parable of the talents. That there's it's actually kind of a weird parable. Like the language of the parable sounds very like greed is good, and Joseph like keys in on that. Like it's the theme of the parable is like this rich man like appoints a servant and gives him so many talents, and like the man doubles his money, and like he says good job, and like this happens a couple more times with increasing amounts of money. Like other servants like get a good job. The last guy like buries the money in the ground and doesn't increase the money, and the rich man is like, what the hell were you doing? And casts him out. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth, like, what do you mean you didn't increase my money? Like, you just buried it in the ground. What the hell, man? So, so not only do you like not get more money to invest, but like what you have is going to be taken away from you. Is kind of how it concludes. So it's like this like super pro-capitalist, like get rich kind of like parable. I think especially like the more literalistically you take it, which Joseph Smith like loves to take scripture literally. And like his conclusion from that is like he's teaching people in Nauvoo, like if you only have one wife, then the wife you have is going to be taken away from you. So you should get as many wives as you can. Like you need to like be increasing your number of wives, just like these servants were expected to increase the money that they'd been given. And I think he sort of applies the same logic to money too, that like, if you look at his pattern of investing over the course of his life, like he's always trying to grow his wealth, just like he's trying to grow his collection of wives. And like So I actually think that like the mentality of the treasure digger, even though he gives up treasure hunting as a profession, despite that weird little trip that he took to Salem that we already talked about, he mostly gives up treasure hunting. But like the mentality of the treasure hunter is still there throughout his life. He's always looking to get rich, and I think like the polygamy is part and parcel of that mentality. So
Women are the treasure.
yeah, very much so.
Interesting. Do you know, have you had a lot of feedback on either of these chapters as far as, especially from the scholarly community, or have people just not read it?
I think the popular reaction has been super positive. With the exception of the people who think that we're being like apologetic, right? Other than that, everything that I've heard has been really positive. The reaction.
We'll just put your comment about Joseph was a narcissist. That'll cure the apologetic thing. Right?
Sure, then I'll get criticism from the other side. I figure if I'm making everybody angry, then I'm doing something right? It's sort of equally opportunity offender. But yeah, so the popular reaction has been really positive. I think like the scholarly reaction has been a little bit more mixed. I've seen some people who are really excited about it, and then others who are like not fully convinced. And like speaking for myself, that tracks for me. Like I'm about 75% convinced myself of our Fanny Alger thesis. Like I don't think we've nailed it down. Like this definitely is the way it is. Like this is definitely what happened. I think we're like most of the way there, but it's not 100% proven or convincing result. And I think the reaction from scholars reflects that a little bit. I want to say Dan Vogel had some reservations about it, and maybe Susan Staker. But I've seen a couple people.
Oh, she's got a chapter in here. I haven't read hers yet. Yeah. I'll have to get her on.
Yeah. But I've read a couple like sort of this is fine, but I'm not convinced kinds of reactions from people. So that's definitely going to be something that's out there and that I think is legitimate.
Well, I will tell you, I know I'll leave them nameless for now, but I know another podcaster who leads more towards an apologetic angle. I'll just say it that way. I said, "Have you read this book yet?" And he had not. And I was like, "You need to do another series on this with this book because there's new stuff."
Yeah,
and he hadn't read it at all. So,
well, yeah, may there be many more such interviews and lots more people engaging with this work. I'm excited to see what other scholars do with this. Because like I said, I'm not fully convinced by my own result, and so I want even if it's disagreeing with me, I want other scholars to come in and offer other perspectives on this evidence that we've laid out because I don't fully trust my own, when you get invested in these ideas, they get stuck in your head. And I just want like other people to come in and like either validate or like be like, Chris, you've gone totally off the deep end with this. Like dig in, let's see what else is out there. So yeah, I would love to see this discussion continue for sure.
Yeah, well, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm really disappointed. You and Christina Rossetti, two of my favorite non-LDS scholars, aren't doing Mormon studies anymore. I remember when we went to MHA in Park City a few years ago, and you said, "It's so great to come to these conferences. Doesn't it just energize you?" And I was like, yes.
Yeah. I know. I miss it. I
mean, are you gonna try to come to conferences, Whitmer, MHA, anything like that, or are you just like, well?
I mean, maybe someday when I am gainfully employed and financially stable. The problem really is I've been living on the edge of poverty for multiple years and like trying to find a career that will pay me decent money, and it's just hard to do as an academic, as you know, Rick. So
yes.
I've been trying to make the career transition to computer science, but like the student loans are maxed out, so I can't borrow more money and go back to school. So I'm trying to do it as like a self-trained developer, and that's really hard too. It's actually just as hard to make a living over here as it is over in academia. So hopefully I can like scale up and really lock down an income in the software world. And then I'll have more sort of financial security to play in the Mormon studies space. But right now I just feel that the pressure of that, financial living on the financial edge, that I need to like really put the screws on and make this software development thing work. And I can't afford to get distracted by all the Mormon studies projects I'd love to do. So I'm crossing my fingers that I'll figure that out. And
I will cross them too.
Down the road, I'll be able to do all the Mormon studies conferences again. We'll see.
Well, and New York probably isn't the cheapest place to live either.
Albany, we live in the Albany area in the suburbs, which
so it's not as bad as New York City.
It hasn't been that bad in terms of cost of living. It's not as good as when I lived in Utah or New Mexico, but I'm also not sure how much of that is just the inflation that's happened. But I'm also not in the optimal place to like meet other software developers and like get plugged into the tech community and get a really high paying job. So, there's always trade-offs too with cost of living versus employment prospects.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Christopher Smith, I wish I could get you, if I see you again, I'm going to have you autograph my copy.
I'd love to.
I've already given away the other autographed copy that I got Claire, Marianne, Cheryl, and John Dinger to sign. So, but I'm going to get you somehow.
All right. Sounds good.
Albany's not very close to New York City. My brother lives right outside New York City, but we'll
if you ever do like the Rochester, New York, Palmyra tour, you can always fly into New York City, loop your way through Albany, go down the Erie Canal, like stop in and.
Well, I flew into Buffalo, so that's a little closer.
Yeah, so you went down the Erie Canal the other way, I bet. Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, Joseph traveled both directions on the Erie Canal at different times in his life, but you're probably going the right direction toward Buffalo. I think he spent more time on that side.
Well, and Whitmer was there 5 years ago, and MHA was there. Was it last year or the year before? I can't remember. So yeah, hopefully Whitmer will come back there again soon. We'll see. Maybe we'll see you there.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. Yeah, I think I went to the one in Rochester. So.
Oh yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. It was right before COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, if they come back here, I'll try to make it out for sure.
All right. Well, Dr. Christopher Smith, author of a couple chapters in Secret Covenants, thank you so much for being here in Gospel Tangents. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Christopher Smith, who's written a couple chapters in Secret Covenants, edited by Cheryl Bruno. So, Chris, thanks for sitting down with me. I think you've done some amazing research, and I hope you can get your way back into Mormon studies. You do great work. In the next conversation, I'm excited to move on to the topic of the Book of Mormon with Brant Gardner.
And one of the things that, oddly enough, Latter-day Saints tend not to admit is that there is a 19th century production culture. Now, we know that there is because it's written in English. It's not written in whatever Nephi was. But for some reason, we want to shy away from that and not talk about the fact that it was produced at that time. And that there are artifacts in the text that show that that's part of the production culture.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.